everyone. Welcome to the Workforce and Business Development Committee meeting on August 2nd. We are here with myself, Tarek Bakari. Let's go through remotely for the other committee members.
Greg Phipps at large.
Nate Johnson, District 4.
Dimple's here? Okay, got it. And then other elected officials start in the room with our mayor. That was Vylisle's mayor. And online, any other electeds?
This is Victoria Watlington, representing District 3.
Excellent.
Braxton Winston at large.
Hello. All right. Great. If that's everyone there, how about a quick staff introduction? We'll start over here.
Fran West, Assistant Director of Economic Development. Christina Thigpen, Deputy Director, Economic Development.
Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Brown, Economic Development.
Alyssa Brown. Todd Long. And online?
Good afternoon, Emily Cantrell, Economic Development.
Great. Okay, so let's jump right into it. We've got a great set of information. If you recall, in our last committee meeting, we went through the skeleton bones of the strategic employment plan, or the Hire Charlotte plan, as it's been named, and we laid out what to expect over the next several quarters. This is our first milestone that we talked about on getting some very important data around the corridors of opportunity study that EY had performed for us under direction of city staff. Again, this is for us to hear that, as well as then comment a bit on it, because it will become a very important input, or the gasoline into the engine of the Hire Charlotte plan, where ultimately we go forward from there, figuring out how we're going to make measurable impacts and outcomes as it relates to economic development, workforce, and business. So with that, how about I hand it over to Fran, who will then take us through it.
Thank you so much. So thanks everyone for your time today. We're excited to present this information to you. So Mayor, I'm glad you're here. So last summer, you referred to Workforce and Business Development Committee a couple of items, and we kind of aggregated those to really say, what are we doing for people who are unemployed throughout our city and in our corridors specifically? So our team took that referral with committee and went back and said, let's understand first and foremost who is unemployed and why. And so in order to do that, we knew we needed a lot of really great data and a great partner to come up with strategies in our community. We've said all along, if this was easy, it would be done by now, and we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this. And so today, I'm excited to present to you the EY team who has worked on this, as well as Emily Cantrell from our team. She's our Senior Manager for Workforce and Talent Development. But first, I just do want to take a second to remind everyone that back in March, the EY team came to this committee and presented some updated demographic findings. You'll see some of that represented today. But we look forward to going through the presentation and then answering any questions, hearing your ideas and suggestions. So with that, I would like to introduce the EY team. So we have Chris Engel, who's our Associate National Director of Economic Development, and John Rees, who's the Director of Research for their Economic Development practice. And then also, as I mentioned, Emily Cantrell as well. So with that, Chris, I will hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Fran, and thank you to the committee for giving us the opportunity to work on this project with you and with staff. It's really been a fantastic process and experience, and as has been shared, we've got a lot of great information produced in this project. There's a big team, behind John and me, from real estate experts to other research analysts. So we're thrilled to be presenting the collective teamwork to you today. And I believe reports are either with you or forthcoming. So let's I don't know, Emily, if you wanted to say a few words before I start. No? Okay. If you could advance.
Let's jump right in.
Great. I believe I've got the ability to advance the slides, Wendy, if that's possible.
You do. Just click on the screen.
Okay. I am clicking. There we go. So there are 6 corridors. We looked at 5 of the 6, and we, aggregated really into 3 subregions. So we aggregated Freedom, Wilkinson, and West into 1 subregion. Betty's Ford is another corridor and subregion. Sugar Creek is the 3rd. We examined really data at both the census tract level. So you'll see in this map, the colors are census tract regions along the corridors. The zip codes really surround these corridors. So depending upon the analysis and the data source, we're either looking at census tract level data or zip code level data. So our scope.
Hey, Chris, can we go back up to that slide real quick just to clarify a couple of things? So just as Fran mentioned, this study was really focused on jobs and economic development as it relates to job creation and employment. And so wanted to just make some distinctions here about geographies as council members and staff and residents often hear corridors of opportunity in a more micro level geography that relates to a specific intersection or portion of a roadway. And so in order to do the demographic analysis that John and Chris are going to walk you through, we really needed to broaden our geographical scope. So when we talk about geographies and corridor geographies in this presentation, it really is these areas that you see on this slide that are shaded in color as well as gray. Simply because we needed to take a more macroeconomic look at the activity that was happening in those geographies to inform the strategy and recommendations you're going to hear today.
Thank you. So this is a summary of our scope. There were 3 primary research components: a workforce analysis, a target industry analysis, and a real estate analysis, all of which aim to answer the question, what does the workforce look like? What are some good industries that could be brought to these corridors, and how does the real estate serve those opportunities? Underneath, you'll see that we've got stakeholder interviews and a resident survey was conducted. We talked with 10 Charlotte employers, 12 workforce service providers. We also talked with real estate brokers as well as part of the real estate analysis. And finally, provided summary recommendations. And just real briefly about these reports, the workforce analysis really examined a lot of data on the unemployment characteristics of the residents in these corridors, demographics, educational attainment, labor skills, and barriers to employment. The target industry analysis really did a deep dive into the workforce skills and the existing employment jobs in in these corridors, and compared the 2 to see where gaps could be found and opportunities found. The real estate analysis then took that target industry list and said, how well is the real estate ready to serve and support job creation in the corridors? So we'll walk through highlights of each of these. John, I'm going to hand it over to you to do the next 3 or 4 slides, please.
Thank you, Chris, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to revisit a lot of this data and share some of our findings with you after our initial conversation back in March. I'll just start with sort of the broader macroeconomic trend over the last 5 or so years, which really is that the city of Charlotte has enjoyed tremendous employment growth in this period between 2014 to 2019. You saw overall employment increase by more than 18%, which is about 3 times the rate of national growth during this period. With that said, despite that impressive employment gains, there are still some pretty significant challenges for many residents within Charlotte, right? The poverty rate is about 14%, which in 2018, I think translated to about 100,000 Charlotte residents living in poverty. And that figure is even more pronounced in some of these corridors we looked at, ranging from about 20% in the Betty's Ford corridor study area to more than 30% in the Sugar Creek corridor. So again, I think and you'll see this sort of dynamic throughout a lot of the data, right, is that there's a lot of positive momentum, but still additional improvements hopefully realized. A couple demographic characteristics and similarities for each of these corridors. One is that the corridor communities of color represent anywhere from about 85 to 90% of the population of each of these corridors. The corridors populations tend to be a bit younger than the city as a whole. And this is particularly important when you look at some of the employment outcomes. It's really that youth age 16 to 24 that faces a lot of displacement from the workforce. Depending on the corridor you're looking at, I think whether it's the Betty's Ford or the Freedom Wilkinson and West, you've got an unemployment rate among that sort of younger population of about 1 in 3, which presents some challenges and opportunities, right? If you can intervene early, you can really move the needle in a pretty significant way among those old or younger residents. So again, that's some of the sort of overview of all three demographics. In the next 3 slides, I want to provide just a little bit more context. I encourage all of you to really look at the report. There is a wealth of additional information within that report. I just want to hit on, again, a couple of the highlights. As Fran and Chris suggested, we looked at 2 geographies. That darker one is based on Census Track data around the corridors. That provides the most granular demographic data available. For a lot of employment data, it's really hard to really go past the zip code level. So we've identified and analyzed zip codes that correspond as closely as possible to those census tract areas highlighted in dark blue. So each of the charts has that specific corridor in dark blue, the broader zip code area, and then to provide some additional context, we've presented data on the city. Again, going back to this overall dynamic, if you're looking at this period between 2013 and 2018, there really is some pretty significant positive momentum, right? Whether you're looking at poverty or the unemployment rate, both of which experienced some pretty impressive declines during this period, right? Things are a pretty severe decline in people living in poverty, pretty big decline in the unemployment rate. You're seeing an increase in labor force participation. And so I think one of the ultimate challenges of this endeavor is how do we maintain this momentum given everything that has happened over the last year or two, but moving forward into a post-pandemic world, how do we maintain this momentum and improve opportunity to an even greater extent? Because I think the other major dynamic you see in a lot of this data is there still are very real disparities between many of the residents in these corridors and the city as a whole, right? That despite that really significant reduction in the poverty rate in the Freedom, Wilkinson, and West corridor, for example, there is still a poverty rate that is about twice the citywide average. Pretty similar dynamic for unemployment, right? Despite a really strong decline immediately prior to the pandemic in those 5 years, the unemployment rate is still twice or more than twice the citywide average. So again, and you'll see this on the next 2 slides, right? Market improvement, but still room to go in comparison to the city as a whole. In the Betty's Ford corridor, reduction in poverty from about 24% to 20%. Unemployment rate fell not as quite as impressively as in the Freedom, Wilkinson, and West corridor, but still an improvement. Overall labor force participation rate is flat. One of the reasons we do look at labor force participation in addition to unemployment is often some economic distress may not be captured by unemployment. The unemployment rate only captures individuals actively looking for work. And so if someone's given up trying to find a job, they're no longer counted as unemployed. But we all know in reality that is someone who we should be trying to improve the sort of economic opportunity with efforts such as these. So again, even though you've seen a reduction in unemployment, there's still a relatively low labor force participation, which suggests that a decent amount of people have basically given up looking for work. Finally, the Sugar Creek corridor, kind of a in-between dynamic between the previous 2 corridors where you've got elevated rates of poverty, right, at over 30%, more than twice the citywide average, but a slight decline. A really strong decline, though, in the unemployment rate, which fell from close to 20% in 2013 to less than 9%. But a slight dip also in labor force participation rate. But again, that unemployment rate in particular is pretty impressive. But then sort of how do we, and again, I think this will be sort of addressed later on in the analysis when we talk about things like workforce and upskilling. You know, it is one thing to sort of get that anchor point in the labor force to get that first job, to reduce that unemployment rate, but then how do we get people to move up the sort of skill and wage ladder so that they're not just employed, but they're also escaping poverty, because that's not necessarily always the case. But again, I think overall things have been moving in the right direction, which I find very encouraging, right? It's sort of, you know, thermodynamics, right? An object at rest tends to stay at rest, an object in motion tends to stay in motion. How do we take this sort of, again, strong momentum over the last 5 or 6 years and push it forward to create even additional opportunities within these corridors? Sorry,
Thank
Chris.
you, John. Yep. We plan to pause after some of the new research, but if anybody has a question now, certainly jump in. But given that this is...
Any questions from the council or mayor on the data? Watlington, Councilmember Watlington.
Quick question. As I see on the surface the data regarding unemployment trending in the right direction, on the one hand, it sounds encouraging. On the other hand, I am curious, given that the data, the unit of analysis is location-based versus kind of household-based, how do we know, or let me ask it this way, do we know that the trends that we're seeing is not a result of displacement and new people moving in, particularly for West Boulevard, Wilkinson, and Freedom, given that we know a lot of development has happened in those areas and a lot of new people moving in with a different socioeconomic status? Are we actually seeing upward mobility, or are we just seeing a change in residents?
I think in general, it is genuine upward and an improvement. On the margins, I think you're probably right, though. As individuals do move into the neighborhood or individuals get moved out or displaced, that can influence this data. You can't really sort of track individuals across time if they do move. With that said, at least in the years we saw, the overall population seemed relatively stable.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I don't have a question, but I will add that you did note that this data went through 2018. When this year's census data for 2020 is available, Alyssa from our team will be updating this data as well, so we can see where we're actually at.
That was going to be one of my 2 questions. One, do we set this up in a way where the new census data can just pretty easily plug and play, show us, which is great, because obviously a lot happened since 2018. And then 2, just so I understand it, the labor force participation rate, if I'm reading it correctly, and I take roughly 72% there plus 6.6% unemployment, does that infer that 22% are not actively looking for work anymore? And how do I wrap my mind around, does that include folks that have retired, or is that like active potential workforce that is in search of a solution for us as well?
So that 72%, that labor force participation only includes people actively looking for work. It does not, you don't count if you're retired, right? If you are in school, again, anything who's not, if you are taking care of your children, if it's not paid work, right, that you're helping out family. And that 6% means basically of the people that are looking for employment, 6% can't find it, if that makes sense.
So that means 22% are not looking for employment, but they could be. Is that right?
Yeah.
And do you have any other breakdowns or data that would help us wrap our minds? And if you're going to get to it, by all means, stop me. Of like, you know, half are this bucket, half are in this bucket. Anything that would help guide us?
No, unfortunately, because of confidentiality issues, once you start basically slicing and dicing and adding sort of more descriptors to it, it becomes too unreliable, and the census tends to suppress that. So this is, about as detailed as we can get with this data.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
And it'll
I
be
think though, Tarek, Councilmember
Yes.
Bakari, right, if you look at the larger youth populations, right, because John, correct me, but I think labor force participation picks up, is it 16 or 18?
It starts at, yeah, it starts at 16, so it doesn't include children, but it doesn't, it would also
So
exclude
if you have
if you're like 20. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So some of that demographic data, right, where we're seeing larger populations of youth as well as older residents are going to affect that labor force participation number as well.
Well, and I only bring it up because I think as we transition into the utilization of this data as our main input into the strategic employment plan, you know, there will logically be two major buckets with a lot of sub buckets. One will be the people who are actively looking and they either can't find it, the job is there, they need up training, whatever. The other will be this other very difficult to solve demographic that I think, though, the lack of data will just because we don't have the data doesn't mean we don't try to dig in there deeply, because there just may be years and years of challenges they've hit where they've just given up, and we could find new routes to help.
Absolutely. And we do have a look for some of that youth. One thing we were able to tease out is the sort of the 18-year-old who is not looking for work, but is also not in school, right? Which is referred to as sort of disconnected youth. Because again, if you're, let's say, a 20-year-old college student, you're not looking for work, you're not counted in either one of those buckets, but that's okay.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Please continue.
Great, thank you. So I wanted to
pause for one more second. I'm sorry, we have one more council question.
Sure.
Councilwoman Johnson.
Thank you. I just wanted to elaborate on the question about the unemployment rate. How did you capture the data for individuals who are looking for employment? I understand the unemployment rate if they were receiving unemployment, to be able to capture that. So how do you capture the data for individuals looking for work?
So there's sort of two sources of information for unemployment. The one that typically gets the top line finding every month is based on that unemployment claims information. The data I'm using is actually from the Census Bureau. It's not quite as timely, right? Which is why you don't hear about it as much. It only goes to 2019, for example. And when we were doing this, only 2018 data was available, but it lets you slice and dice the demographics in a way that you can't with that top line figure that you often hear about. And so the census data literally asks people, they send them a survey and ask, are you looking for a job? Do you have a job? And so that's how they're answering that question. So it's a little, to some extent, I think it's a better capture than the top line unemployment rate data that you typically hear, because it only captures people that are in the sort of formal economy.
So
this data is more holistic.
Thank you. So if we have individuals who exhausted unemployment benefits or weren't eligible for unemployment, or transient population, or individuals who did not answer the census, they would not be captured in this data, correct?
All those people would be captured as long as they answered the census.
Okay.
If they didn't answer the census, but I can attest, they are extremely dogmatic when they're doing. This is not the census, that's sent out every year. This is one that's sent out every year. I got actually randomly selected for this a couple of years ago, and it's extraordinarily comprehensive. And one of the questions was what my heating bill was, and I thought it was something else, and I wrote I think $300. And 2 months later, I got a call from the Census Department saying that seems unusually high. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, I think it's $20 a month. So they're very thorough and very diligent.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Any other comments? If not, I'll move on. We can certainly, come back to this topic. Some of the new activities since we were with you in March were around some interviews with employers and service providers. So these were just great conversations. I just want to really emphasize some of the employer conversations that they expressed a desire. And these were employers across multiple industries, different sizes. All of them had a hiring need for people at the entry level. So it was a great conversation about how they, what kind of programs they have in place to help, workers that may have some barriers or challenges. They're all very strong in their desire and willingness to continue to collaborate. And so that's a key, key finding, and certainly we've heard a lot in the news about some of the major employers and what they're trying to accomplish. There are also expressed, some positive comments about the great collaboration that's happening locally between philanthropy, government, and the corporate community. So, the alignment and collaboration is really moving in the right direction, but some felt that even greater alignment across programmings would help. We also talked with the Charlotte Workforce Providers Council. They had 15 service providers at that meeting, and talked about barriers and some of the programs that they put in place post-COVID. And finally, this our heavy data analysis was supplemented with a resident survey that the city sent out, and asking why individuals were unemployed, what happened because of COVID or not, are they finding it difficult to work, what barriers, what are the reasons why they're unemployed, and more importantly, what they wanted to do to find employment, and whether they felt like they needed more skills or more information, or trouble finding childcare, for example. In general, respondents expressed a strong interest in a variety of careers, some of which we've set as targets for these corridors, from healthcare, technology, even entertainment. For the sake of time, I'll keep going unless I'm stopped. These other two research efforts were very extensive. Again, deep dive reports that you'll see. Target industry evaluation really focused on workforce availability and workforce skills. Really, companies are searching for ways to access workers, particularly post-COVID, when labor is starting to get tight. And we picked industries that really provide upward career opportunities as well for residents. So there is a lot of diverse skills, and there are a lot of people commuting out of these corridors for jobs, multiple zip codes away. And so we see that commuter workforce as a great opportunity, a great resource, to really, bring employers, get their attention on these corridors. So our suggested targets are in manufacturing, logistics and distribution, healthcare, and technology/administrative support services. And for each of these, we provide detailed profiles on what's driving them, what they look for in terms of workforce and locations. The real estate evaluation included an inventory of every building and site in these corridors, looking at the current age, current size, the current use of those properties. Our real estate team conducted broker interviews to get a better feel for what's happening in those corridors, and really emphasize that, hey, there's a lot of great activity happening in the real estate market across the city. Looking at some of the drivers of where development is going right now, from the airport to the business district and some of the transportation networks. But overall, the data indicated that the building quality in the corridors is relatively poor, and a lot of old buildings, and even that there is a potential shortage of sites to attract diverse industries. We'll talk about that more in a minute. And the team, through their work, identified intersections and focus areas in the corridors that they felt were, ripe for redevelopment or new development, all of which is in a very extensive report.
Hey, Chris, can I just jump in here for a second? Because I really want to emphasize in the last 5 or 6 slides you've seen is the tip of the iceberg in terms of the data we asked EY to collect in this initiative. And if you go back to the March presentation, you hear from members of our community, such as Danielle Frazier, who really pointed to the opportunity that this data will allow us to start to create the more kind of micro-geographical findings and strategies and interventions. I think Councilmember Bakari used the word scalpel level when looking at how we can start to slice and dice this data. And so really the reports and the appendices of the study get into some very specific data points around these geographies that we feel like was a missing link, right, in delivering data-driven solutions to some of the problems that have kind of continued in these areas for quite some time. So we're excited about this level of data. We're also a little bit intimidated by it, but it gives us a huge platform for which to start to look at some more narrowly defined geographies and strategies and interventions as a result of this work.
Yes, thank you, Emily. And I'll say as well, we intend this work to be a reference tool for you, for staff, even for the community to refer back to as implementation, continues and projects are put together. I'm going to comment a little bit about each of the corridors, and then I'm going to get into the recommendations. So just a really high-level view of what the type of work that was done, in the Freedom, Wilkinson, and West corridors. Airport certainly is going to be the main driver of new development, job creation. But the large demand for warehousing is both great and also a potential for squeezing out other industries, and we've got to recognize that. And I think with some new employment announcements in the region that aren't warehousing, it's gotten us excited about thinking about diverse industries, particularly since the labor has some strengths in logistics as well as manufacturing and food and education. There's also a large youth population that will be entering the workforce that will be needing career training opportunities and would like to see a diverse set of jobs. In terms of potential targets, I think mid to large scale back office, small fulfillment centers, small manufacturing, in West, office adaptive reuse and Freedom, small fulfillment, small manufacturing, mixed use commercial in Wilkinson. Momentum is there. In Betty's Ford, it stood out in terms of lower density, but certainly increasing connectivity, or lower connectivity, but increasing, and surrounding development pressure, into this corridor. There's some diverse land uses and vacant land that's available to be, really thought through how to make the most of that. Workforce strengths are in healthcare and transportation. Again, two great targets for, Central Charlotte, but lack of jobs relative to those workforce skills. And again, a young workforce that is ready for that career training and skill development. Potential development targets could be from small to mixed scale office, mid-sized flex space, even workforce training on the ground. Logistics, light industrial, and distribution centers along Sunset. Finally, with Sugar Creek, again, lower density, but, community-driven development. Also vacant land, but, there's industrial hubs that can be, built upon and momentum expanded. There is a large resident commuter workforce with a diverse industry skills. That seems to be a theme. A lot of skills, needing to connect the jobs to those skills. And the younger workforce, really has been top of mind for our work and conversations. You'll see from the list below that there's a number of potential mixed use, adaptive reuse projects, flex space across, multiple industries. It's very quick and a lot to consume, but certainly something to refer back to for those of you that want to get into specific corridors and the findings from our real estate work in that report. I'll pause for a minute. Great. So
I got a question.
Sure.
In a section for corridor residents, you said that 300 were interviewed, but only 88 came from the corridor. Is that correct?
That's right. And so we, with a survey, you have to send it out. Emily may have a few words about this, but we did an analysis of the 88 residents in the corridor and felt like the distribution of the sample was good for our work.
Yeah, and Councilmember Phipps, I think that's a fair question. We did this over the summer. There were a lot of entities and agencies surveying organizations and residents. I think our community, number one, was incredibly fatigued as a result of the pandemic, but also probably survey fatigued. So while we had hoped for slightly higher numbers for corridor residents, we felt like the sample size was adequate to make some of the general findings. But I think it's just it was a function of timing, right, as well, when we were getting the survey out into the community.
Also, I guess when we get the report, will there be a breakdown in the number of census tracts that you did, that you surveyed or evaluated within the zip code? Like in 28213, how many census tracts did you look at compared to the number of census tracts in 28213?
John, that's a good question, Councilmember. We might need to just get back to you. And I'm not sure if we showed the census tracts as a percentage of the overall data, but that's something that we could certainly add if it's missing.
I'd say I will add that. I know it's not necessarily one for one. Some of the tracks can overlap and be in 2 zip codes.
Yeah, I know we've had some connectivity issues. Do we get that question answered? Okay.
Yes, we're good.
Great.
Yeah, the question wasn't fully answered, but if we don't know it off the top of our head, we can circle back with that. Is that what the answer was?
Yeah, and I'm looking back. There was
that question off short.
There was a total of 11 census tracts within those 2 zip codes. Off the top of my head, though, I can't tell you which one is in which zip code.
Okay, let's follow back up with that. And then was that it, Councilmember Phipps?
Yeah, right now, yeah.
Great. Councilwoman Watlington has a question?
Got a couple. Councilmember Phipps asked my first question. I wanted to make sure I understood how exactly the labor or the current skills were assessed or what the needs were. I do think there's an opportunity. Obviously, I think folks look at this, there's opportunity to get more data always, right? But I wanted to dig in a little bit more on the West Freedom and Wilkinson section where you've got the suggested or potential targets. I wanted to understand, outside of the airport, what drove the specifics around the back office, the adaptive reuse, and then fulfillment centers and manufacturing? In particular, I'm curious as to what would prevent us from also focusing on healthcare or fintech or other technology. I saw culture and engagement was one area or one sector that came out of the residents survey. So I'm just curious what, outside of the airport being nearby, drove these particular targets?
Sure. The real estate team really looked at it from a physical building and land use perspective. And so we're not talking necessarily about industries, and we're not suggesting no healthcare here. That would fall inside, the back office and the mixed use centers as well. So I think the takeaway here is that that there's a lot of room for thinking around a more diverse set of properties to serve a diverse set of industries in these corridors.
Okay, and that I think is the point that I want to make sure stays at the top as we think about complete communities, because as I'm sure your real estate folks saw, and you alluded to a little bit, we've got a overconcentration of some different types of industry in the area, and we want to make sure that we're building complete communities in concert with our 2040 goals. So more to come on that, I'm sure, but just wanted to lift that up at this stage. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I think too, council members, you know, right, particularly for the Wilkinson geography, as you start to drive towards the airport out of the center business district, right, you see even just how rapidly that corridor changes in terms of land use types and industry types. So certainly as the central business district continues to expand rings, more of that kind of back office opportunity for multiple industries will start to present itself.
Great. If there are any more questions, I'll jump into the strategic framework.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, so, you know, based on what we've learned, what we've heard, what the data tells us, you know, we came back to staff with a set of recommendations based on a framework of these 3 goals. All right, the first goal is about employers and targeting opportunity employers to locate and expand in the corridors. And by opportunity employer, we really mean an employer that is hiring from someone at the skill level and has programs that are designed to onboard and support workers that may have barriers. And there are employers that are doing this. So connecting them into these corridors is part of this strategic framework. And I'll talk about each of the recommendations underneath these in a minute. The second main goal bucket is about real estate and how to spark commercial real estate development within the corridors. The third goal is about residents and how we should assist corridor residents with overcoming barriers to employment and accessing career and economic opportunities in collaboration with existing partners. I'll talk about each one of these in a separate slide, but first I want to emphasize that, you know, the city's role is varied. 3 potential roles across any of the actions that we've presented is first role could be to lead or manage and actually take ownership and lead on that. Second would be to convene and catalyze, usually with existing partners, or to support and encourage through new, you know, activities or funding. Emily, do you want to say anything
Chris,
about
I'll
this?
just jump in here. Yeah, I think one of the city's main roles, to be honest, is to also integrate this work into Hire Charlotte, which is our strategic employment framework. So think of it as a strategic framework that will roll into another strategic framework. But really, with the 3 target areas that Chris identified on the previous slide, those are in direct relation to the focus areas on the steering committee and the project team for Hire Charlotte. And so this work, while it's probably at a more advanced stage in terms of completion and public digestion, the framework and the implementation of this work will certainly be integrated into the Hire Charlotte strategy so that there's just congruence and alignment, right, in both of these initiatives around employment and job creation.
Thank you. So goal 1, opportunity employers. You know, we're collectively and in conversations with city staff, you know, want to create an opportunity employers program that really, you know, encourages company to collaborate with the city and hire and train corridor residents and celebrate them when they do. 1.2 is to proactively attract target industry businesses into the corridors. This usually involves more marketing and more information, potentially more tools to make the corridors, you know, more well-known. 1.3 is about engaging with employers already in the corridors to hire more residents. Could be through reemployment and reentry programs, potentially a corridor job board for companies in the corridors, and even some pre-certification of some federal hiring grants for residents that may not be aware of those programs, or employers that may not be aware.
So Chris is presenting a tempered look at this recommendation, but it's one that gets me the most excited, right? Because I think there's a lot of great momentum in the employer space in our community around economic mobility issues, around DEI commitments. And I think this really can help put a formal kind of program and brand around our employers who already have programs and policies in place that allow residents with some barriers to employment or barriers to career growth to enter into occupations or grow within that industry. And so I sit on the CELC's Workforce Development Committee as an example. Right, those employers have already laid a foundation for commitments around work-based learning, entry-level jobs. But the committee has also realized, right, that in order to achieve the goals they're seeking, they need to start engaging employers outside of that CELC framework as well. And this is one way that we think we can help them do that by putting together some criteria around what it means to be an opportunity employer. You don't have to be located in the corridors, but for those that are, we're going to look at ways that we can help you be successful and potentially expand and to potentially increase the number of opportunities for residents in that geography. And for those that are outside the corridors, we want to make sure that their job opportunities are well known within these geographies for residents who are job seeking or looking for career advancement.
Pause for a quick second. Madam Mayor, you have a question or comment?
I have two questions. I have to say, Chris, when I saw the page that said corridors of opportunity, I was really glad because I wanted to ask about opportunity zones. How many of us remember this? And how many of us participated in it? Several of us around this table. And yet I kind of wondered if the staff could respond because I see the words. I don't see how they differ. Maybe the federal level was a different standard than ours. So not to answer necessarily today, but when we're talking about these kinds of changes and setting these kinds of dimensions for review, it would be good to know your assessment of what happened before when we had some of these same words and same types of tactics and goals, and why didn't it work then? And how do we make sure, and this is something maybe EY can help us with, was there something distinctive about our geography, our work, our community, our city that we didn't know how to take advantage of it? Or what was your assessment of it? So that was one of the questions that I have about this. Perhaps I've worked in just a number of jobs programs and I'm trying to figure out what distinguishes this one as we move forward here. And then the second question that I would have for the staff is that as an organization, we've created all kinds of one-off programs. And if we're going to actually require or see the opportunities that have been presented in collaboration, I was wondering what is our inventory of apprenticeship programs for specific functions? I know the airport has one, the water department has one, and there are lots of these things. And are we actually doing our own housework? Are we taking care of ourselves in a way that we can mirror and show examples? I just believe that you have to walk the talk, and before you go ask someone else to join in with you. So not today, it's not a question or an answer that has to be taken today, but I think one that if we don't know what happened in the past and come forward, then we're not really using our learnings. And I think success drives success as well.
Yeah, I agree, Madam Mayor, and I'll just answer your first question and we can get more information to you about the others. But part of the Hire Charlotte framework is exactly what you mentioned, which is an inventory of existing programs, initiatives, studies, looking at not just what the City of Charlotte offers as an organization, but reports that we've co-authored, other reports in the community that have looked at these opportunities, and then also inventorying programs that our employers are offering, as well as our workforce development providers. So we are being intentional in looking at how we are currently representing these opportunities and how we can also integrate some of this work into the Hire Charlotte framework, and then what potential that allows for in the future.
And I say that just to add to that, Emily, it's easier to train someone for a job than to get a new job into the community that you have to recruit someone. And if we would look at our employment, healthcare, government employment, I think are the top two, and I might be wrong on the one or two, or maybe it's in the top 10. Where are the needs right now? If I hear one more person say I have to close because I don't have enough people, what are we doing that addresses the people that work here? You know, the follow-up program that you do, Fran, where you call the people after they've been here a while and say, what are we telling Centene? Are they at their 3,000 person mark? Are they having a problem getting there? So where does this fit in this idea of the corridors specifically? That's, I guess I want to drive it down a little bit. So thank you for letting me ask those questions. Yes, Fran.
Well, do you want me to get back to you on this, or do you want me to
Well, if you got
continue the conversation?
Well, I'm always delighted for a conversation, Fran. I mean, I've never stopped talking like that. So
oh, we don't either. So what I would say about the corridors, and Todd, I'm glad you're here today because Todd's worked a lot on our opportunity zones, but there's a lot of momentum and energy around our corridors of opportunity through the work of the mayor, of your task force, mayor, and the community. And so I think Emily and others would say that the momentum that we're experiencing specifically in this area, we do think that while it is a new program of sorts, it is something that has potential to be successful. The reason why too is you look at where have we been over the past 5 years since I've been just in business recruitment. Every closed session I hear, where is this going? Is it going to go in a corridor? And so as we start to bring forward the real estate aspect of this, and it is so critical to be able to match it up with the passion of employers in our city today. This isn't just about business recruitment employers, right? I think a lot of this is in market, they're existing. And so Mayor, to your point, there's a labor shortage. The irony of what we're presenting right now is we're also in this situation in our city and across the country of we don't have enough workers. And so then that really brings in the resident piece, which is the disconnect, right? So how are we bringing them into the conversation to make sure that they have the skills they need for whether it is working in healthcare at Atrium or Novant or working at Amazon in a distribution center? How do we where is the disconnect today and how do we close that gap is the intent of this work. Todd, did you have anything to add about opportunity zones?
Sure. So I think on the opportunity zones, it was a federal program. There's certainly things we've learned a lot over the last 3 years since that program was rolled out. And, you know, it was more heavily focused towards real estate acquisition, and the city was more of an indirect influencer on what happens through those programs than a direct influencer. So I think programs like this and the work that we've been doing with EY, I think it complements what was going on with the opportunity zones and some of the foundations that we laid out with opportunity zones that we further, I think, enhance through corridors of opportunity to get us to a position where we can actually more directly influence what actually happens on our corridors rather than trying to find ways to incentivize somebody to think about doing something that we'd like them to do and encourage them to do, but this has more of a direct and more intentional response to some of the needs we're seeing on the corridors. So I think that we're learning as we go, but I also say that this is not necessarily replacing one or the other, it's actually enhancing and complementing the work that we've been doing. And hopefully we continue to take it steps and steps further as we get through more evolutions of the corridors of opportunity initiatives and all that is encompassed within that.
And I just add, I think that personally, having been in this space on all fronts for years, right? The biggest flaw to date, as well as the biggest flaw that will determine our own success and failure in doing this is, do we approach these as 3 separate goals or 3 different things, or is it a comprehensive thing of which the order and the connectivity is the make or break moment in it? Because if we go out and try to say employers, whether you're existing and we recruit them, well, that's just what we already do. There's no difference there. Or the real estate. That's why the opportunity zones, it's just one tool in a tool belt and residents. So we have to go out, and I think the order is actually opposite. And I know this doesn't imply an order, but you have to start with the residents but using the data of what we're going to go recruit or look internally from the employers to say, okay, in the Beatties Ford corridor, we're going to do 1, 2, 3. And then we're going to take the existing talent that's there that we pitched. We're going to have increased talent development, all the wraparound services to make that successful. But unless you have the jobs, it doesn't matter. But to have the jobs, we need to be able to pitch the talent and to say that's there. And then you have to have the place. So the order in this is so fine. But then once, I think what we do, like we do normally, but at a very targeted geographic perspective, is we say, here are the 20 or 30 employers, half of which are maybe here, half of which we're going to recruit from outside of here, that we're going to go after because we're going to pitch them these things. And then we customize the workforce components behind it. And then we work with the real estate community to then say, okay, what opportunities are there to house different things? So we're pitching people a solution, not asking them to say, hey, come in here and make this a charitable, effort. And I think that's the difference. And if, again, it's so hard to do this. It is so hard. And that's the importance of the strategic employment plan, Hire Charlotte. But there's 1,000 ways we can get it wrong and only a couple we can get it right.
But we're going to get it right.
I hope so. Okay, if you guys want to finish that.
Those odds.
If you guys would like to finish that off, and then we can take a final round of questions from anyone.
Right.
Yep, you have a few more slides.
We do. So I'll finish the rest of the recommendations. I'll show you that we really do see this as an enhancing and aligning existing programs and activities, but really energizing a lot. All right. So you'll see in this real estate section that there's a lot of potential for really pressing on the gas in a number of areas. So 2.1 is really about promoting sites and buildings within the corridors, and getting aggressive with marketing and communications and that always room for improvement there. 2.2 is about identifying the strategic sites within the corridors that you really want to see public-private partnerships bring something intentionally. Okay. And so it's a forward-looking, intentional process, identifying which sites are likely to be those sites to bring that diverse set of industries. 2.3, to expand the city's communications platform to entice development into the corridors. So again, more marketing and communications, which traditional, EDC, Economic Development Corporation, really does in a huge way. Empowering and these public-private partnerships by expanding, the toolkit around them, understanding what tools are there and looking at how additional tools could be brought to this conversation. And 2.5, to create an equitable development program to truly train and certify minority professionals in the real estate development community to be focused on the corridors. I'll move to the next goal area, goal 3 about residents. Really, this goal is to assist corridor residents with overcoming barriers to employment and accessing career and economic opportunities. So we want to, just like we did with employers, to launch an opportunity workforce initiative. To include, the existing services and partners, but also to expand the education and training hubs in the corridors that align with these target industries. 3.2, to expand the capacity of these existing high-performance nonprofits that serve the opportunity workers that are the target of this effort. Really possibly investing in what you would call best practices. What are most effective out there, and how do we need to expand capacity of these nonprofits that are really out there, boots on the ground, doing the work. 3.3, we wanted to certainly point to the need to expand entrepreneurship opportunities for aspiring business owners. Some people may want to find work through starting a business, and that needs to be in the mix. So then you start talking about accelerator programs or capital investment programs for startup entrepreneurs in the corridors. 3.4, we need to think about how to improve the transportation solutions that get corridor residents to the opportunity employers, and if needed, explore things like ride sharing or dedicated busing or shuttles. We can't let that be a barrier. And 3.5, to support a diverse set of programs that help corridor residents overcome barriers to education or barriers to employment or barriers to career advancement. Things like child care assistance, ensuring broadband access is going in where it needs to be, and even creating what we call a digital navigator program to help corridor residents find the services across a diverse set of service providers and the city to find those services that they need to be successful. Ultimately, we see this as a...
Sorry,
sure.
Chris, can you go back up one more? Just so this is an important slide to note that the city's role will likely be different, right, than our role with working directly with employers. And this is one where, right, we want to partner and build capacity with the existing workforce ecosystem. One, through their role in Hire Charlotte, but look at some of these ways in which we have direct influence, others in which we have been able to, over the past year with CARES funding and other ways, to increase capacity of some of these organizations. But really this falls into kind of our convener and capacity builder. We are not envisioning starting programs specifically targeted to residents outside of the ones that we already have, but really looking at what's working well in our community. How can we potentially increase capacity through the services and programs that we directly offer, or how could we increase capacity in other ways?
That's right. And this becomes an opportunity platform which connects the dots between the stakeholders and the goals. So we have opportunity employers, opportunity real estate developers that seek to collaborate with the city around these goals, opportunity service providers, opportunity workers. And ultimately it's about aligning efforts, customizing efforts to fit the corridors and the populations that live in those corridors, and finding ways to develop solutions at scale. I know we're short on time.
And I think to Councilmember Bakari's point, in my mind, this is really a Venn diagram, right? So I think, Chris, we should probably just redo this slide to show the intersections between these four elements, because, to your point, Councilmember, that the way that this will work is through that really intentional integration. And what excites me about this work is that I don't know that we've ever presented data in a way that shows the need and starts to lay out a roadmap for this type of integration. This work, we need to be thinking about all four of these levers for change, and how we're engaging our initial rollout of some of these recommendations. So I think to probably more visually, appropriately capture that, we need to start to think of these as, more like the intersecting circles, rather than four separately divided kind of entities that each have their own responsibilities.
Yeah, I think, Emily, I totally agree with that. I'd also say, usually we approach things in this city at a macro level, policy, programs, here it is, here's the thing, and it's kind of bazooka. This is very much not just an integrated Venn diagram there, but it's a sniper rifle, where we're pointing it at very specific geographies and neighborhoods. So, that is both hard, but it has a benefit in that you can very measurably see what is happening, and you have to real time be able to tweak and augment. So, I think this is one of those things where you aim small, miss small, and you really focus in. And then once you've gotten the right formula, then you start expanding in concentric circles out, because each one of these geographies is going to have its very own specific thing. For example, in the Beatty's Ford stuff, I would have expected an executive summary to see something more around technology and data science, given the fact that JCSU is sitting right there. and other things that are occurring. So I think we also need to overlay some of the other resources that we know can be factors as we figure out, all right, we're going to try to go all in on one topic to start in that small kind of aim perspective to begin with, and then build out all those Venn diagram pieces that you talked about.
Yeah, and I would just like to add to that, Mayor, you asked about opportunity zones. I feel like opportunity zones are like this big kind of like nebulous thing where this corridors of opportunity is a very city-driven strategy. And then it's also now a community-driven strategy where there's already work being done in all four of these buckets. It's just now convening all of that together and bringing it kind of into like one cohesive strategy. To your point, Councilmember Bakari, very targeted, very exact, very small, very customized. And that's how it's going to feed into Hire. Like Hire Charlotte is looking at Charlotte as a whole entity to this degree of detail. Right. And so this will feed in as a work stream that kind of lets us pilot this new approach that and hopefully it's one that's actually going to like create measurable change. And I think what's nice is that John and his team and Alyssa did such a deep dive on the data to begin with that we'll get 2020 census data, we'll get more. And again, Mayor, to your point, we work with these companies all the time to be able to get from them the data. Hey, who are you hiring? Are you hitting your goals? Where are they from? What's the barriers? How do we help you? Are our employees being retained? And then kind of continue to, I guess, Emily, like customize our approach as we move this forward.
I want to just say that we have 8,800 employees, and that's who we have to make sure they come in every day, do the job that they have to do. We need to do that. And everything else on this list requires us to collaborate with the private sector to get this work done. So to me, I think that creating this template is a good one. And we do need to start on both sides, in my thinking, is to begin to talk to people that employ people, but also begin to talk to people that are unemployed, because even we don't do training programs for every type of activity that we're trying to go through. So if we don't have an LPN program that works on the weekends and at night at Central Piedmont, because there's not enough federal state funding to come into Central Piedmont to have faculty that will work at night and on the weekends. So what are we doing for nursing care that we already know is a profession that desperately needs entry level so that they can grow to the actual top level of their career? So I guess what I'm saying is that I think a lot of these words, we really need to figure out what exactly we're trying to do to make this work. I think we have to make it work for our 8,800 people, but I also think we have to make it easy for us to explain to existing and new private sector employers how we can help and where we can't help. I'm struggling with this. I'm just struggling with it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that one of the reasons we're probably all struggling a little now is this is still pretty much the data input overview that we're getting, and staff has to, while there are some recommendations and frameworks and goals here, I think that's really rudimentary in that the next step, as you'll see in our planning schedule on the Hire Charlotte stuff, is really going through and bringing back, here's a step-by-step playbook that is going to be called, and because it's great data, but it's a lot of buzzwords and theory. Like we need really tactical, what's going to happen next.
And I think that's a great segue into our next slide.
Well, I think we have all right, so finish the next slide and then we'll go to the council members that are cheating.
And I'll just take this really quick, Chris. But I think, over the next weeks and months, Emily and Chris and the UI team and Alyssa will probably take this out to several different stakeholder committees, again, to get that cohesive buy-in from our community, because you just saw, and to the mayor's point, it's not just about what the city is going to do on itself. It's going to be integrated into Hire, which I think we've said plenty of times. But the last bullet is one that I think our team's excited about. So over this next, couple, let's just say through the end of the year, what are some of those pilot projects that we can do that create the alignment between the four sections, right? The employers, the residents, real estate, and workforce, that kind of test this out, does it work? But number two, kind of shows how it all comes together, because on paper, it is a lot of words. There is a lot of work happening in our community around these things, but how can we show you an example of what this would look like to execute on a very small targeted scale, bringing these four components together? Because I think even when we do infrastructure projects, right, you don't get people excited till they can see it on the ground. So I think even with with the EY work, how do we pull it together to show an example so people can get excited about it, and then we can build momentum and grow it at a grander scale? I have confidence that it will work. Again, it's an easy problem to solve. I mean, it's a hard problem to solve for. So
that's why it's really important that we really have this candid discussion about what it's everything mean. And I'm looking forward to the feedback that we get. I really appreciate the ability to have the data updates more often and more frequently, and the nimbleness that will allow us to have. So that makes a big difference. I just can't stress the collaboration that's necessary from the major employers, that we have jobs now and we'll have jobs in 2 years. If you go to this training program, then we have a job that if you go this 4 years, you can get into this program. I often think about our residents and we talk in words that are difficult for them to see in their real lives. And I like to have them see something in their real lives.
Yeah. And I think that's why, Fran, I totally agree with that sentiment, and that will be the differentiator of success and failure. But I firmly believe in what you've said, though, on the other side of that, which is we have to get very tactical and we have to start and prove something out quickly, because we need to build the confidence and trust of the private sector to then say, okay, I see you're going to scale that. I'll sign up for this. I'll commit to that. Because no one's going to sign up unless they do it in a charitable fashion before we've shown them that, hey, there's a proof point here. So, and then Councilwoman Johnson, I think you had a question or a comment.
Thank you. This is an exciting plan. One of the words that Chris used was intentional and intentionality. And I think that's so important. I use that word a lot. And I know that our business development department, when they've been intentional about areas of the city, how impactful that can be. And I'm saying that as the District 4 representative, the home of the jobs, right? So I've heard the story that Centene initially was looking at another area, but they were given information about this area. So to be given information to the employers about the corridors and the branding and the marketing and being intentional about the development of the area will be very helpful. One of the things that I saw with this plan, and you've mentioned it, Councilmember Bakari, is a comprehensive plan, or to take a pilot with 30, 40 employers in the different industries and work with them and marry them or match them with potential job candidates, and maybe give those employers the need or the resources that they need to collaborate with the state, maybe for the work opportunity tax credit training. I mean, there's a whole tax credit for employers when they hire individuals in these vulnerable populations, but some employers may not be aware of it or don't know how to utilize it. It is a complicated process. So if we collaborate with someone from the state and say, here's a resource. Another collaborative opportunity is working with the county. The individuals who responded to these surveys, you mentioned the census data and unemployment. We're missing folks. So if we can meet them where they are. I was just looking at the census data, and in the 2 zip codes in my area, the 13 and the 06 for the Sugar Creek area. So we have to meet people where they are. So if we're able to collaborate with the county, perhaps their ED department, maybe send this survey out to SNAP recipients, or work with the county and maybe make that a requirement. It is a requirement that folks look for jobs. So maybe incorporate this survey into the process for them applying for benefits. So if we can take a targeted population of unemployed individuals and a targeted population of employers to help remove those barriers, the work opportunity tax credit, maybe banning the box, maybe try that as a pilot. Another thing, when you talk about there aren't any workers, the reason that there aren't workers is because, you know, there are individuals who are making more on unemployment than they were working, and that's the truth. So can we incentivize employers into paying a livable wage? So we have this data. So if we just put all this together and support solution-focused approaches, that could, you know, really make a difference, I think, and have the impact. So collaborating with the county and the state for resources and information. And again, incentivizing employers for removing these barriers, the criminal justice, the banning the box, higher pay, teaching them about the different incentives, and taking a group of individuals, first of all, capturing the data completely, meeting people where they are, and marrying the two populations. That's all. Thank you.
Great feedback. Thank you. Councilwoman Watlington.
Much of what I was going to say has already been said. I'm appreciative of the work that's been done so far. I think everybody keeps saying it. It's like, how do we get down to the deeper level? And I think part of that is not only engaging with external stakeholders, but also internal. I know that as we even walk through this playbook process for each of these corridors, we've gotten very, very specific. There's been community engagement through that process at the individual level that lifts up specific potential projects and pilots. One thing comes to mind is in terms of how our policies can impact entrepreneurship, things like minimum square footage required, ways to subsidize rent for businesses, providing spaces for businesses to come in and have startup opportunities, incubators and whatnot, whether it's kitchen space for catering businesses or whatever it is, right? All of these kinds of things are popping up through this playbook process. So as we're talking about stakeholders, let's make sure that we're leveraging the information that's been captured through Housing and Neighborhood Services and through some of our cross-functional teams internally, because I think that as the mayor talks about what is going to differentiate this work from before, it's got to show up at that ground level. And obviously we only have so many resources, but we've got people walking neighborhoods every day through code enforcement and the like. So I think that's where we'll start to see the differences, and we'll really be able to highlight things that can be significant and specific to the populations where they live. I'm glad that Councilmember Johnson mentioned reentry as well, because it's got to be that. We know that a lot of the population in these areas are justice involved. And so as we think about employers and who we're recruiting, how do we marry that up to folks who have been justice involved and need a shot? We probably shouldn't be recruiting banks to come to these areas if we're talking about increasing employment for people. And then as it relates to entrepreneurship, I'm really glad to have seen that recommendation, because we know oftentimes that that's the more realistic path for a lot of these folks. And so how do we enable entrepreneurship in these areas? The other thing I was going to say is I think I heard wanted to focus with minority realtors and real estate professionals about focusing on the corridor. That's one thing that Crown has already been doing. I definitely think that is a great idea, but I also think we should expand that to all realtors, particularly folks that are working with these corporate companies, because we've got to think about how we're marketing these corridors or how we're not marketing these corridors to folks that are moving into the area when we think about social capital, when we think about schools and resources and how those are distributed across the county, I think is broader than just the minority realtors. Those were the main things. And then finally, I also agree with the mayor as she talked about internally, what can we do for the 8,000 employees that we have? We know what gaps we have or in the pipeline and what's causing people to drop out of our application pool or our applicant pool. How do we start small, even internally? So more to come. I'm hopeful to see what we do next. Thank you guys for this.
Great feedback. And I'd also just add as a side note, on the banks front in that comment, I think that's actually a really good point, and it brings up the fact that we should, and I know my co-chair is here as well from Intergovernmental, this is really an opportunity for us to also lobby for some certain things, because I know personally many of my bank partners very much want to hire formerly incarcerated folks that have paid their debt to society, but they are hindered by a lot of old legislation federally that honestly doesn't really make a lot of sense anymore, given that many of these roles are in different areas that don't necessarily touch sensitive data or money or things of that nature. And we could make a difference, and they would work with us to make some of those changes. So I think that just illustrates, though, the broader point of this is 1,000 different topics all melding together into one plan, and then we need to divide and conquer. So very good points. And with that, do you think you have a final update for us?
Well, just quick closing notes. I just did want to say thank you so much to Councilmember Johnson and Watlington for your comments. The resident piece of this is critically important, and that is where we are very much going to rely on our workforce development partners who are already doing this work in the community to help them. But I would also say to you as council, I know when I have talked with Charlotte Works, their biggest ask is, hey, help us get into the communities, help us get connected with the people who need assistance. And so as we continue to go through this work, we can do a lot of work on opportunity employers and in real estate and with our partners, but we need to also have and be successful at engaging our residents who we need to either upskill or train or just connect into the resources that they need to be able to get a job that works for them and their family. So with that, thank you for your comments. I really appreciate it. And I will pass it to Christina to talk about hire.
Thanks, Fran. So if we could show the project schedule, I just wanted to give an update. A lot of the great feedback we discussed in our previous agenda item, I think can be applied to the success of Hire Charlotte. We just had a great steering committee kickoff meeting and wanted to share a couple of quick takeaways about next steps with that. Can Wendy show the project schedule? Thank you. And I think the big discussion point was, yes, we're doing a lot of meaningful work and confirming that there's still so much momentum of purpose around this and that we want to capitalize on this and really address how there's an opportunity for more connectivity. The biggest thing was the takeaways from the steering committee included having a better sense of the outcomes and deliverables by the end of the year. We recognize it's a very ambitious timeline, but there's so much related work that's going on that we can build off of and take a holistic approach to employment and how everybody fits into the employment ecosystem. So one of our immediate takeaways is coming up with further defining what deliverables we'll have ready for December. And this will include a process to finalize the pathways to achieve these outcomes in that time. Also, we know that we're going to add another September meeting for the steering committee so that we can continue to get feedback on that we have the right milestones for December, as well as the fact that we'll be responding to all of this existing reports and initiatives relevant to this work so we can have a good snapshot of the current data available to inform the work. And that will determine then what current resources we're using, what other primary research needs to occur, and then developing subcommittees that are needed. One other takeaway that came away from the steering committee was that while they felt that the 20+ leaders across different stakeholders of the employment ecosystem
were representative of the group. We needed to add a couple mid-sized employers because someone shared that 90% of the companies in the area are made up of 90 employees or less. So we want to make sure that their voice is heard throughout the process. Another immediate step is going to be creating and launching a Hire Charlotte project website so that everybody can see where the progress is. And if they want to get tapped in as we build out the structure, there's an opportunity to do so. So I think we've used a lot of this similar words throughout the course of this committee meeting in terms of it's about being intentional, strategic, and data driven. And so we really are relying on this data and some of the ongoing work that's already happening to build upon this so we can make the most of this Hire Charlotte initiative and make it be more complementary and not duplicative of how Charlotte is more proactive when it comes to job creation and filling jobs for our residents and businesses.
Questions from or comments from council? I would just, again, I think you guys are doing a lot of heavy lift work here, so we all appreciate it. And it is aggressive timeline. My only feedback is just, I think step one in success is about showing pilot results, small wins, very tactical geographic things. So when there's an opportunity to try something out versus convene a group or, put something on the website for everyone's transparency, I would default to doing it, because where we can prove something out with 20 people or one employer or one small business and one workforce provider this year, we can scale that next year. We can use it to pitch and scale it next year. So I think that would be my only point of feedback. Okay, so it looks like there's nothing else from that. Any final thoughts there? Okay. I don't have much of a report other than I think one of the things we need to do in the coming weeks is really delve into particularly the economic development related topics of the ARP stuff from the feds and what we're going to do to evolve that and advance it from what we did last year with, again, a heavy focus on outcomes and on retooling and things of that nature, not just grants. So I look forward to that later. And just as a personal point of privilege, I would like to say congratulations to all of the Workforce Investment Network graduates from the cohort 3 last week that are starting their jobs at all the banks and tech companies and folks in town. That brings that number up to 113. We're really proud of over the time we've done. Lives changed. Also for the youth, the YTAC groups, the graduates there, that's 415 lives changed with the graduation on Friday. So we're real proud of that. And thanks to all the private sector partners and everyone who came together to impact a material number of lives there. So with that, motion to close. So moved. See you next time.